Good evening and welcome again to This Is Your Life. A strange way to start our program with a film of a wedding that took place at 2:30 this afternoon. Perhaps you've just seen it in the news. No, we didn't interrupt it, but at 6:30 this evening, the famous groom was invited to a very private celebration, and so were we. This corridor is in the executive offices of the Associated British Picture Corporation in London's West End, and behind one of these doors, the elder statesmen of the Variety Club of Great Britain are gathered to toast their president, or Chief Barker, our bridegroom of this afternoon. Only two people in that room know that we're here. Let's go in.
One more. That's fine. Could I have one very happy for everybody if I can?
Why should you be happy? Uh-oh.
What happened?
Well, this is a little more recorded.
A little more recorded for you.
Yes. This may want also, as a part
Excuse
of
me,
the
gentlemen. Good evening, gentlemen.
What's your name?
Hello. Thank you, Mr. Ladd, and thank you, Mr. Goodlatte, for allowing us to come in here and say, W.E. Billy Butlin, M.B.E., this is your life. And I want to really thank you.
You don't mean it, don't you?
Of course I mean it, yes. Here's the camera watching you. We have a fast car outside. Our audience are already assembling, waiting for you at the theater, and the elder statesmen of the Variety Club have all helped, some of them without knowing. So, are you ready to come?
I'll never trust you, Gary.
All right, let's head for the theater anyway. Come on. Well, I've never seen a more surprised man in my life, have you? Billy Butlin, this is your life. And our audience here have been looking at pictures taken 30 minutes ago. And as you walked on our stage here, you saw a picture taken over 30 years ago.
Olympia.
Olympia it is, indeed. You recognize that dapper young man in the far corner? That's yourself, isn't it? I wonder if you can see in this corner. There's another man. Can you recognize that face? It's not a very good reproduction of him.
I know his face, I forget his name.
You remember his name, I'm telling you. His name is Cliff Jost. Remember?
Yes.
Of course you do, and here he is. Come right in, Cliff. Wow, here's Cliff standing in front of the very same stall he worked at some 30 years ago. Tell us, how did you come to work for Billy, Cliff?
Well, in 1924, I got a job through our ex-servicemen organization to go on the fairground with Sir Billy Butlin. He was traveling showman and traveling on the fairs with a few stores and stuff.
Yeah, well, now, that was over 35 years ago. What are you doing now?
I'm still our governor.
You're still working with the governor, yes, I
I'm
know.
a manager now at Bognor, amusement park.
At Bognor. Now, tell me, in those 35 years, Cliff, any cross words?
Oh, we fell out several times.
You did?
Early days.
Didn't you try to leave him once?
Yes, I gave him a notice in once. But I got pride, I think, with an ice cream.
You got talked out of it with an ice cream. Why did you give him notice? What?
Well, I've been 3 years working at the firm, and I started with 3 suits, £5, and after 3 years, no suit for one, but I stood up in and no money.
Well,
I didn't have many suits either.
No, I know.
That's true, too, because what did he say to you when you said you were going to resign or leave? What did he say about himself? You said there was no
he said
future.
that a few days after we started the fairground, I gave him a notice. He said he sent me up. I went up in the driver's seat next to him. So he said, why are you leaving me? So I said, I explained the position. These suits and no money. So he saw my poor indisposed. But he said, I don't intend to stop this way all my life. I'm going to get on. If I get on, you can get on with me. And so there was a boy coming along with an ice cream cart selling cornets. So he said, go and get 2 cornets. So I gave him 2. I went for the cornets, gave him the 2. He said, well, take 1. I ate 1, he ate 1. I never thought of leaving again.
Well, that was probably about the best 4pence Billy Butlin ever invested. And thank you very much, Cliff Jots. Thank you. All right, Leandro. Now, that stall at Olympia was a stepping stone, but your entry into the world of fairgrounds and amusements had started long before. Now, when was the idea born? It's a good question, and perhaps the answer lies in a department store in Toronto, Canada, some 3,500 miles away and 10 decades away. Now, to tell us about it, on film from Toronto, Eric
Speaking
Heathcote.
to you after what, 40 years? Do you remember when we were kids, after the First War, in the city advertising department of the Teton Company, where we worked in that awful basement, painting and stenciling posters, under the eagle eye of our old friend Leon Pole, long since gone? In those days, we called you Soldier Bill. But I think the thing which comes to my mind is the remark which you made prior to your leaving for England, when you said, to hell with this business, I'm going back to England to buy a circus. And you did, in a big way. Bill, it's been a wonderful experience for me to have this privilege of speaking to you. And may I only say, we send you all kinds of greetings and good luck for the future.
Thank you, Eric Heathcote in Toronto. Well, Bill, you didn't buy that circus right away, but you knew where and how you were to go about getting it. Handing all your savings to your widowed mother to sustain her until you could send her or send for her, you hitchhike from Toronto to St. John, New Brunswick, and sign on as a member of a crew of a cargo boat bound for England. You arrive in England on a bitter winter's night in February 1921. Your total assets, £5, the paying off money from the ship. Do you by any chance remember, Bill, where you spent that first night in England?
It's a long time ago.
I'll tell you where you spent it. You spent it in a seaman's hostel in Liverpool, a place that has since bombed and doesn't exist anymore. And the next day, you
Next day, I started to walk to Bristol.
That's right. Or Bedminster, to be exact.
Yep.
Or Dorney's Yard, to be even more exact. That's the winter quarters for fairground folk in the West Country for more than a century. And where you were hoping to find, who were you hoping to find there?
My uncle Marshall Hill, Lottie Connolly, my mother's sister. And
Your mother's sister. Well, she was, in fact, your mother's favorite sister, Lottie Connolly, and unfortunately she's no longer alive to tell us of that first meeting.
But I can remember it well.
Well, that's one of your relations who was there. She's still in the entertainment business.
Liza Hill.
Yes, come in, Liza Hill. Now, Liza, we want you to tell us about that arrival of Bill Butlin.
We arrived in Dorney's Yard and no one recognized him. So someone said, that's Bertha Hill's son. And they showed him, someone said, well, he showed him where his Aunt Lottie's wagon was, and he went.
He went there. Now, his mother came from fairground folk, did she?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And she married?
She married a vicar's son.
A vicar's son. Was that not an unusual match?
Well, yes, in show business.
Uh-huh. And what was the parents' attitude to that?
Well, I don't think they were much pleased about it.
They weren't pleased, so what did the couple do?
They immigrated and went to South Africa.
South Africa. And there in the city of Johannesburg, September the 29th, 1898, you were born. Unfortunately, there wasn't a happy ending to this love match, and when you're 11, your parents divorce, and your mother returns to England, bringing you with her. Now, we want to ask you, Liza, how did Bill get to Canada?
His mother remarried, and they immigrated.
Right, and so we come back to 1921 and your arrival at Dorney's Yard, where a family conference is held. And, of course, the man who remembers the decisions made at that family conference is a man you mentioned a second ago, Liza's husband, Marshall Hill. He said he should have told him about it, but we never tell anybody on This Is Your Life. Marshall, tell us what was decided at that family conference.
Oh, it was decided that Bill would run a stall, which was going to be a hoopla stall, at the fairs in the West Country, you know. And his first place of opening, of course, was the Taxis Fair on the 25th and 26th of March.
How do you remember the date so well?
By coincidence, of course, it was the very first day that I also opened a stall in my own right, and it happened to be the same sort of stall as well.
Well, tell me, how did Bill make out with his hoopla stall?
Oh, pretty well, I think. Yes, he must have done. Pretty obvious, isn't it? He must have done very well.
That's a good point that I didn't think you were going to say, but it is now that I come to think of it. And I believe that Bill introduced a sort of innovation at his stall.
Yeah, he didn't tell us, of course, but
I didn't know.
He cut the corners off the blocks to make it rather easier to win the prizes, you know.
But if he cut the corner off the blocks, the rings would go down much more easily, wouldn't they?
Oh, yes, but I suppose he thought, well, if he gives them a lot of prizes, he'll take a lot more money, and it still worked all right, I expect.
I think it did. And for reviving those memories of, 40 years ago, thank you, Liza and Bill Marshall. Thank you.
Can I say?
Please, yeah. Here I am calling Marshall Hill, Bill Marshall, but never mind. Well, now, Billy, you're well and truly set as a fairground man. Erecting and dismantling your stalls, you travel the West Country from town to town, from village to village. Driving the tractor, was it, that with your trailer behind?
A four-wheel drive.
A four-wheel drive through country lanes and busy market towns, sometimes whistling or humming a snatch of a song. Perhaps this song. I don't know.
Come roosters crow, you'll find the Germans lying low.
I was in the Bantams battalion. That was our regimental march.
It was the Bantam Roster Song, the marching song of the 216th Canadian Expeditionary Force, 1914-1918. That's the battalion in which you were one of the youngest bugle boys ever in World War I. And we found one of your fellow bugle boys from the same battalion. Speaking from Canada, you'll remember Ethelbert Brooks, just over your left
long
shoulder.
skinny?
Long skinny it is, yes.
Buglery Brooks, 273019, 216th Battalion. Do you remember Camp Borden when you were in charge of the bugle band and I spoke out of turn and you were going to take me to the orderly room unless I apologized to you, which I did, with the result that when I did get my pass, I didn't come back to Camp Borden but went overseas with my dad. Then there was a time on one of our route marches that you called me Ethel. And in those days, I was pretty thin-skinned. And I made a swing at you with my bugle and nearly connected with your head. And do you remember the time Fitzpatrick, the bass drummer, fell over the bass drum in front of the city hall? Oh, boy, those were the days.
Thank you, Ethelbert Brooks in Canada.
I wasn't in charge of the band. I was a lance corporal. It's the highest rank I ever got.
It was good enough to call him Athelin and nearly be missed by the bugle, but never mind. As he says, those were the days. And soon training is completed, and you embark for France and the shooting war, to service in the mud and cold of Flanders, Ypres, and Cambrai. Now, during the whole of your army service in Europe, you carry with you the picture of a girl you'd met back home in Toronto. I know it's a fine thing to be reminding you of on your wedding day, but it's true. And perhaps this tune will remind you of her.
I passed by your window when the morning was red.
That tune reminded her of you.
Jean.
Yes, indeed. Oh, he remembers. Jean Coombs, now Mrs. Jean Rose. And she's flown all the way from Toronto to be with you tonight. Come in, Mrs. Rose.
Well,
She's
the
over to
BBC
see you.
brought me here.
Now, I want to know, Mrs. Rose, what as I pass by your window? How does that come into our story?
Well, the night before Bill left from Canada to go to England to seek his fortune, his mother had a little party. And I was there, and Bill got up and stood by the piano, and he sang that song. And at that time, up to that time, I never knew that he had such a nice voice. And that, you know, could sing a solo. And I thought it was lovely, and I've always remembered that tune. Anytime I hear it, I always think of you.
That was the last time you met, wasn't it?
Yes, and that was the last time were together.
That's a long time ago.
Yes,
Jane.
a long time
ago. Tell us how you first met.
Well, we met at a St. Patrick's party, Annie Blundell's party, remember? And then we worked at Eaton's together.
Eaton's was the departmental store. What was Billy's job there?
Well, he was an office boy, one time anyway, and he was, incidentally, the fastest office boy at Eaton's.
Fastest boy, you mean, or office boy?
Office boy. And he was so fast. Well,
You better explain why he was so fast, would
well, he got the idea that if he had roller skates, he could go through these long corridors.
We had the tunnels underneath.
Yes, you see, there was so much ground to cover in this huge building.
I just asked you because it's not what our audience was thinking, you see.
Oh.
Let's just move on. I believe that his acceptance into the Army wasn't exactly as he'd planned it.
Well, no. At that time, there were a lot of young chaps that wanted to volunteer for the Army, and they in branches that weren't, they weren't places for them, you see. And they gave them a badge and told them that they would be called on when there was a place for them.
So Billy wanted a badge, did he?
Well, I suppose so. And so